that they often don't kind of explain the basic principles of what you need to do. They give you the structure of do this, and do this, but they don't really do what's next. So we actually have a new name on the agenda today, and that is Naomi Kong. And this is somebody I've never actually heard of, but this is actually something that Austin sent to me. Very fair point that I've never really covered full body workouts, and I've never really extensively spoken about beginner workouts as well. So maybe we could kind of like two birds, one stone the situation and cover some of the issues I have with these beginner workouts, and also how to effectively structure a full body workout. Obviously, before we crack on with the video, you know what we're about to do, and again, I am trying to make an effort to make things shorter right now. If at any point you decide you like the video, then please let me know you like the video by liking the video. 1,300 likes is the goal, so if we reach that, I would very much appreciate it. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, then do consider dropping it down below in the comment section for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. The hat is a bit anticlimactic today, but it's small and it's orange. I've got to like position it well so you can actually see it, otherwise it's kind of off the camera. I look like a unicorn that's too tall. See, that looks better to me. Maybe people will take me seriously. So Naomi Kong is a fitness content creator, and from what I've seen on her channel, she's actually got a fair few kind of like instructional videos where she talks about how to do certain movements, and also a few of these follow along videos where you essentially follow along with her while she does her workout, and that's essentially the concept of the video, which in fairness I think is actually a really good concept, especially for those who may be new to the gym, so beginners, and also those who may be battling with gym anxiety or something similar. I think having a follow along workout can really help ease that uncertainty or that anxiety you might be having, and almost give you that support that you feel you might need to make it through your workout. Because essentially, I think for a lot of people, the gym is quite an anxiety-provoking place, and because there's almost so many options or so many things you can do, so many machines you can play with, so many things, a lot of people do worry that they're doing something wrong, or maybe somebody's looking at them and judging them. People are often so fixated on what they're doing in the gym, they probably don't even realise you're there. And if you ever do worry that maybe you're doing something wrong, then please never hesitate to ask somebody. Oftentimes gyms do have personal trainers lingering, and I feel like they'd probably be able to help you when figuring out how best to use machines. So if you are battling with gym anxiety, perhaps go to the gym and just walk on the treadmill, or sit on a bike or something for a few minutes, and almost like plan out what you're going to do, kind of scope out the machines you're going to use, think about how you're going to use it, maybe watch some YouTube videos online, and if you feel comfortable doing so, maybe take that step and tackle that first machine, then maybe the second, and just do as much as you feel comfortable doing. And remember that even just walking through the door is a huge achievement in itself. You can always come back the next day if you want to. There's no rush and there's no pressure. There is no deadline to what you're trying to achieve here. You've got to move at your own pace. So treadmill 5 minutes, assume this is part of the warm-up. Number 2, Smith machine squats, 2x12 warm-up, 3x12 working set, wide grip lat pull down, 3x12, chest press machine, 3x12. What's next on the old agenda, part 2, 10 minutes Stairmaster. Interesting. Let's have a gander, shall we? It's nice that Naomi's including the warm-up. I do think doing some like low-intensity, steady-state cardio, such as walking on a treadmill for 5 to 10 minutes before a workout, can be a pretty good time before you then inevitably maybe do your mobility perhaps, or maybe go into the workout itself and maybe do your warm-up sets and warm up in the movement you plan to be performing. The Smith machine squat is actually a pretty solid movement. I'm a fan of it. And I think doing warm-up sets is definitely a good idea, because you're essentially priming your body to go through the movement and the range of motion you intend to be performing, doing some warm-up sets on squats before inevitably going heavier on the squats.
We'll rest for 1 minute in between each set.
So the 1 minute rest is something I've covered before. I think it's quite a generic and typical approach to rest periods when looking at like resistance training, but ultimately it really does depend on your goals and arguably proximity to failure, and potentially as a beginner you probably could justify resting for a minute and be okay with it. It's worth getting into the habit of eventually resting for as long as you need to rest, and provided you're training with sufficient intensity, so you're in the kind of like the green zone, we'll say, if you are looking at building muscle mass, so hypertrophy, which is what one can assume one of the goals of this workout is, considering its resistance training dominant, then typically I wouldn't be surprised if your rest periods do hover around the 3 minute mark at some point. I'm not saying you have to start with that, but eventually they may progress to that point, because essentially we try and look at 4 things when we're resting. Is the local muscle recovered? So for example, that might be the quads in this case. Have the quads stopped burning? Do they feel like they're good again? Are the synergistic muscles recovered? So the muscle groups that may not be the primary emphasis, but they're almost like the secondary muscle groups being worked, so perhaps the glutes in this case. Have the glutes recovered? Number 3 would be, has your nervous system recovered, like psychological psychologically are you ready to go? Are you back in the right headspace to do another set? And number 4, has your breathing recovered? Are you still trying to get your breath back? All those bits and bobs. If you can tick all those 4 checkpoints and all 4 of those areas have recovered, you're probably ready to do another set.
Remember to place the bar right behind your shoulders on your upper back and not on your neck. Inhale as you contract your core to go down into the squat, and exhale as you squeeze your glutes to return back to starting position.
So it is great that Naomi's obviously giving some pointers of how to squat throughout the movement. I think that's fantastic. The big thing with the breathing, I have covered this once before, is, again, personal preference, there's no right or wrong, but typically what I would like to do is I would take a big breath in at the top here, go down, hold that breath throughout the entire movement, and breathe out only once I have finished the rep. So you breathe in before starting, breathe out after finishing. So that way, I feel like if you breathe during the rep, there's a high chance of losing tightness. Squat to University, I've mentioned this again before, covered something where it's like going underwater. So you take a big breath in before you go underwater, come out of water, take the breath out. The same kind of technique applies to breathing or bracing when looking at like squats and just training in general. Again, that's merely preference. You don't have to follow that. That's just what I prefer. But I think the movement section of the squat is definitely a good one. I did notice earlier that the workout is essentially sets of 12 and only 12. Again, I think for a beginner workout, if you're trying to keep it really simple, I think that's fair enough, you can. But to me, when I see like a single rep target on everything, it strikes me as a bit lazy, especially as humans notoriously undershoot intensity. I feel like maybe going through like a more of a range might be a better idea of maybe, let's say, like 8 to 15 or something.
I'll be using the wide grip bar for wide grip lat pull-downs to target my lat muscles more specifically, but feel free to use any attachment that you have available to you that you enjoy using.
Opting for a wider grip here may actually end up taking emphasis off the lats rather than placing emphasis on the lats. So essentially, when you're looking at the lats, one of the primary functions is adduction to the body, so keeping that upper arm as close to the body as possible. When you're wide gripping like so, you cannot keep that upper arm very close to the body, whereas if you were to adopt more of a neutral grip, where you are kind of shoulder width, you may find it easier to keep it close to the body, therefore may place greater emphasis on the lats that way. So I would typically probably opt for a more neutral grip. Going for the wider grip is probably going to hit more of like the upper to mid back muscles instead. You're probably going to get a fair kind of stimulus towards the thoracic region of the lat, so the kind of upper lats. But if doing a pull down variation, I typically don't want to exceed about 120 degrees at the armpit. You absolutely can, I'm merely stating if you really want to optimize lat involvement when doing pull downs, and I would typically go for like a single arm pull down or something similar. But again, I do think the lat pull down is a very good movement, but perhaps it might be better for more mid to upper back muscles. A lot of people kind of used to fall into that trap of, they used to be like, oh, pin your shoulders back before you initiate any kind of pulling movement, allow your scapula to move how it wants to move, and it'll probably end up naturally retracting on its way down anyway, so I wouldn't stress too much about that. So a couple of the issues I have when it comes to beginner workouts on YouTube is, again, this is not isolating this one whatsoever. This is merely just kind of got the thought rolling in my head. I don't think there's a problem with doing very machine-dominant workouts, especially to start. Absolutely not. I think machines are fantastic. But a lot of them are almost structured in quite a lazy way. Like I mentioned earlier about the lack of rep range, maybe even isolated rest periods. They often don't kind of explain the basic principles of what you need to do. They give you the structure of do this, and do this, but they don't really do what's next. They don't often explain the importance of training intensity. How hard should you be pushing it, depending on your goals. If you are in the gym resistance training, a common goal would be hypertrophy, so building muscle. So like I said, you need to be in that kind of 0 to 4 reps in reserve, so anywhere from 4 reps from failure. They also don't speak much about progressing volume, so as your training block progresses, you can consider increasing volume accordingly. So starting with quite low volume, so your minimal effective volume, and then increase it across the weeks. Another thing you can also do though, intensity, so you can increase intensity across the weeks. They also don't necessarily go into too much detail about things like the importance of water, the importance of sleep. They often tend to neglect to really cover the importance of progressive overload, especially in the beginner phases where we can really milk this every week almost. You want to be trying to do a little bit more every week if possible. An extra rep, an extra bit of weight, maybe even an extra set, so you're progressing volume, something along those lines. And oftentimes those points are often neglected. And I also think another point which is often neglected is when you're looking for certain movements is almost identifying what makes a good movement for the muscle group you're trying to target. So this is a great example of when looking at chest presses, you typically want to find one that converges. So for example, you see Naomi here, actually starts wide and actually finishes the rep, the hands get closer together, so it's converging. As we know, one of the primary functions of the pecs is to bring the upper arm across the body. So if we can converge, we are aligning with that primary function. Therefore, a chest press that does converge is definitely a big win, and it's definitely something you should look out for, because some of them actually diverge, where they'll start wide and almost get wider, which goes against the primary function of the pecs. Even small considerations of what to do if you fail. I think oftentimes when I was a beginner, I would get really scared of what do I do when I fail. I'll be embarrassed, I'll be this and this. But the reality is just explain, well, if you fail, then what can you do to get around it? So let's say you fail the Smith machine squat. Maybe talk about the importance of setting up the safety pins at the bottom, so if you do fail, you have something to fall back on. Worst comes to worst, you are able to just rack it back in. Same like the lat pull down. If you fail the lat pull down, what do you do? Because you're in quite a safe position, you can just simply place it back. Same with the chest press. If you fail, you can just slide out, sort of thing. So those are a couple of the common drawbacks I see when it comes to beginner workouts. It's more just a lack of explanation surrounding what if this happens and what's next after this workout. And the other thing I want to quickly mention is obviously Naomi is very flared at the elbows here. Typically if we are doing a press, we want to kind of tuck our upper arm a bit lower down, so maybe kind of 45 degrees or so, better aligns with the fibers of the pecs, and also puts your shoulders in a better position, as you may find that you can go through a better range of motion more comfortably if your elbows aren't so flared. If I flare my elbows, I can get to here. That's as far as I can go. If I tuck them 45 degrees, I can go pretty much the whole way down. So immediately I've opened myself up to a new range of motion. And when you're thinking of like chest presses, you typically do think of lengthened position dominant movements, so this bottom portion being the kind of key area here. So if you can go through even more of a range of motion in that bottom portion and take it to a more lengthened position, then that's only going to be a good time, provided you have the mobility and range of motion allowances to do so. Because the pecs are a muscle group that do respond well to stretch mediated hypertrophy, which I have covered in some of the growth guide videos before, essentially saying that lengthened position dominant movements, so movements in which the tension is greatest at the bottom here, are a good time for the pecs. So like many chest press variations. But yeah, no, I do like how Naomi has structured this in that she's got a lower, a push and a pull. I think it's a really good structure. Arguably, you could say, is a volume sufficient because it is only 3 movements, but I think if this is your first workout, I do think it's definitely a good kind of way of structuring of just legs, push, pull. But you can certainly progress it a bit further and think about, well, how else could you structure a beginner workout? It doesn't necessarily need to be your first workout, for maybe a workout for the beginner stages of training and a full body workout at that. And you could think of a few things. You could essentially do 2 legs, so a quad focus movement, so let's say a squat variation like we saw Naomi do, or maybe a leg press variation, which will obviously bring in the glutes as well. And then you can maybe do a hamstring isolation movement, like a seated leg curl, so then you get the hamstrings, the quads and the glutes worked. Love it. You could either go 2 chest movements, so maybe a press movement where you're working the pecs in their lengthened position, and then maybe a fly movement, machine or cable fly, not dumbbell fly. So you're working the pecs in perhaps a shortened position, and then you could do 2 pull movements, so let's say a lat bias row and maybe then like an upper back bias row as well. That's one way of structuring it. Or you could flip around a bit and maybe do same thing, 2 legs like a squat variation and a hamstring movement. Then you could maybe go a horizontal press like a chest press, and then a vertical press, so a shoulder press. Then you could do a horizontal pull, so a rowing motion for the lats, and then maybe do a vertical pull, so like a pull down, which might be a bit more upper to mid back focused. So many ways to go through it, because then you're going through 6 movements. You're working the shoulders as a synergistic muscle there, so when you're doing any kind of chest pressing, the anterior delts could be involved. When you're doing some upper back work for the pulling motion, the rear delts are going to jump in as well. You're also working the biceps as a synergistic muscle, so obviously when you're doing any pull motion, because we are flexing the elbow against resistance, so bending that elbow against resistance, so pulling something towards us, the biceps are going to be working. And you're also working the triceps as well, because when we're extending the elbow against resistance, so essentially straightening the elbow against resistance, so like a press variation, the triceps going to be working too. So realistically, you kind of tick all boxes. So I think this would certainly be a good starting point of 1 leg, 1 push, 1 pull. But then over time, you can maybe progress to 2 leg, 1 push, 1 pull, 2 leg, 1 push, 2 pull, 2 leg, 2 push, 2 pull. Something along those lines. Not only are you able to progress weight each week, but now you're also progressing volume by increasing the number of exercises you're doing. Just don't do too many. And reps, honestly, realistically with reps, you're actually looking at anywhere from about 5 to 30 reps. That's kind of like the green zone for hypertrophy, so the building of muscle. And sets, I'd probably start towards the lower end of the spectrum, so maybe do 2 sets of everything to start. Then you can always increase to 3 sets of bits and bobs as time progresses, increasing the weight being used through progressive overload, but also increasing the amount of volume through either the exercises being done or perhaps the number of sets being performed. Typically, I think for like a full body workout, I probably wouldn't exceed 6 exercises. Arguably, you could do 7 or so, but I think 6 is a really good number. That's not right or wrong, that's just preference. Sometimes you might do 5, sometimes you might do 7, it really depends. but I think 6 is a good middle ground when you progress towards that point, because it allows us to work the kind of the primary muscle groups pretty sufficiently, which then in turn allows us to then work the secondary muscle groups fairly sufficiently as well, provided your movement section is pretty good. So if you're only doing isolation movements for the shoulders and the chest, your triceps are going to be a bit neglected, whereas if you focus a bit more on compounds, maybe not so much. As a whole, this is a fantastic thing that Naomi has done here with this kind of follow-along workout. I think the structure of how she's done it is pretty bloody solid as well, although as I did mention, there are a few technical points I would probably change throughout the movements, which I didn't want to go into too much detail on today because I really am wary that I'm going to talk for 20 minutes and you're going to all hate me. But this is something I can certainly elaborate on a bit further. I thought this would be a really great opportunity to maybe just briefly cover a few mistakes and maybe issues I might have with beginner workouts in general, not just isolating Naomi's here and kind of just using her as an example for a follow along and a catalyst for conversation, but also kind of give my input on full body workouts as well. And I think full body workouts are bloody fantastic. Also to note, how often should you do a full body workout? Arguably, I probably wouldn't do a full body workout more than 3 times a week. So you could do a full body workout anywhere from 1 time a week to 3 times a week. If you then start resistance training 4 times a week, I'd probably move it from full body to maybe upper lower, or something along those lines. But I think full body up to 3 times a week is plenty for a lot of people. But now that's done, we're very quickly going to crack on with comment question of the week. I injured a hamstring quite some time ago, and I hope you could offer some insight into how to train to correct imbalances without compensating with other muscles and becoming wonky or developing poor form. At the moment I do single leg RDLs, but my non-injured side gets more DOMs than my injured/weaker side, so I must be doing something wrong, but I can't tell what. Ultimately, when it comes to injuries, I typically say like the first kind of course of action should likely be seeking professional advice from perhaps a physio, for example, as they're obviously going to be far more qualified to discuss these things than I am. When it comes to just imbalances in general, this is something I have kind of addressed before. Provided you are healed, or the injury is gone, you're good to go again. Imbalances do typically tend to resolve themselves over time. I know a lot of people kind of go single leg work and then they'll do more reps on the weaker side. Please don't do that. I would typically keep up with your training as per, and over time the imbalance will likely correct itself. But also you're doing the right thing there by including unilateral movements as well, so single leg movements, because that is also going to further help the imbalance correct itself. Just ensure that you are prioritizing or starting with the weaker side first and then matching reps with the stronger side. That is it. That is a video. If at any point you decide that throughout this video you liked the video, then please do consider liking the video. 1,300 likes is a goal, so if we reach that I would very much appreciate it. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you two have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, then do consider dropping it down below in the comment section for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating the fact that I should have worn my orange t-shirt to match my orange hat. I've just realised that now. I'm a failure. Forgive me. And thank you for tolerating the video.